Hello, and thank you for joining TBR's Enterprise Edge Market Spotlight. I'm Nikki Catchpole, Senior Analyst at Technology Business Research and co-author of the Enterprise Edge Market Landscape. Today, I'm very happy to be joined by Bharath Ramesh, representing HPE Edge Technology and Strategy. Welcome, Bharath, and thanks so much for joining me today. To start with, would you
Thanks,
mind
Nikki.
providing us with a quick introduction to yourself and your role at HPE?
Sure. So as Nikki mentioned, I had product management and strategy for Edge and IT systems at HPE. This includes our product line called Edge Line and our software portfolio around the OT Link platform. So I basically lead the team that conceives and productizes these Edge and IoT products, especially as we're starting to see the needs of our customers at the edge grow beyond the simple levels of compute they've had in the past.
Excellent. And just to give some context for those of you who have or haven't been recipients of TBR's coverage of the Edge so far, in this report we address the market trends, dynamics, and also feature thought-leading companies shaping the growth of the edge compute technology industry today, HPE obviously being one of them. In the report we highlight some of the market differentiating strategies of each of the vendors, and we put up a one-pager that goes through what HPE and some of the others pulled together, but it really does not do any of these market leaders justice to cover the unique perspective that each of them bring to the market. So, Bharath, we really appreciate you joining us on behalf of HPE to lend your insights and provide some more live and depth and perspective today. So that being said, I'd like to lead in with edge computing being one of those technologies that sometimes can be puzzling for people and really not easy to pin down in terms of its definition. And it seems that every organization seems to have a slightly different lens from which they view it. So simply to start, how does HPE define the edge?
Sure, and we actually have a very simple definition of the edge. To us, the edge is anything that's not a data center or a cloud. And when you think about it, a cloud is a data center, it's just not your data center. So that's a pretty wide definition. So it really encompasses a variety of locations and scenarios, right? For example, in a factory floor, that's manufacturing product could be an edge, an oil rig could be an edge, a college campus is an edge, even the car you drive or the plane you fly could be an edge. So we'd argue that the edge has actually always existed, right? Well before IoT and edge became buzzwords in our industry, and arguably even before enterprise IT was a thing, the edge has always been there. The edge has always been collecting data, right? Because when you think about it on a manufacturing floor, you have systems like programmable logic controllers that are monitoring boilers and conveyors and taking control actions based on data that they sense. And much of the data they sense is data from the physical world. So it's data that already exists, pressure, temperature, vibration. And all you're doing now is digitizing it and analyzing it and taking actions based on it. So the edge has always been there. What's changing is the organizations are starting to realize that this data at the edge has value, right? And this data at the edge can be used to improve their business processes, optimize their business, reduce cost, improve quality. You can even create new business models because much of this edge data in the past has been siloed, kind of it's trapped in its own proprietary enclosed system. But once you start letting this data go free and we're able to amalgamate this data with data from other systems at the edge, you start to create new business models, right? A great example could be location-based services, right? Knowing what your customers and subscribers are doing and being able to pitch promotions or offers to them based on their location. And that's only possible because now we have access to that data and you're able to analyze and take a control action based on it. Now, in the past, what we have seen is a lot of companies just take this data from the edge and they've sent it to the cloud for processing because that was a really easy and simple thing for them to do to get started with edge analytics. But increasingly, we see customers hitting a wall, right? Because anytime you send data over a long distance, you introduce a number of risks. One of the key risks is just the risk of increased latency for you to get a response back. And when you think of a scenario where maybe you're manufacturing widgets in a factory and it's a high velocity manufacturing process, you're churning out thousands of these devices and you want to inspect them. That is a time critical activity. You really want to be able to collect that data analyze it, and give a pass-fail result as quickly as possible. So you minimize the chance that defective parts go further down the line and are picked up much later in the process when the cost of correcting that defect is increased substantially. So latency is indeed a big driver. And unfortunately, one of the things we haven't figured out how to solve is breaking the speed of light, because that's really what's dictating the minimum latency. And anytime you send data long distances, you are subject to that constraint of the speed of light. So doing this compute, doing this analysis at the edge close to the data is pretty essential in those kind of use cases. The second would be bandwidth. I mean, when you think of, say, an oil rig in West Texas, there really isn't great connectivity from that location back to a data center or a cloud somewhere. So do you even have the bandwidth to send all that data? Do you want to send that kind of data across a public network? Because a lot of manufacturing processes are proprietary trade secrets. They don't really want raw operational data transiting a public network. They're worried about the implications of maybe personally identifiable information being sent across networks. Like we've seen in Europe with regulations like GDPR. There's a great emphasis on maintaining data sovereignty, knowing where the data resides, making sure it's compliant with rules. In the medical domain, there are pretty strict requirements around patient confidentiality and keeping that data secure and local. And then there's always the risk data gets lost, right? No matter how well we architect our networks, there is bound to be scenarios where data is lost in transit, data is corrupted in transit. And really many of these issues can be solved when you start moving that compute that exists in the cloud and data center out to the edge. So really, when we think about edge and edge computing, we really think in terms of those 7 domains: latency, bandwidth, compliance, security, duplication, and data corruption as driving the need for these customers to do edge compute.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I think the fact that a simple question around the definition of a new, or not new, but an area of technology such as edge that people are finally becoming acquainted with lends itself to so many different intricate pieces and touch across the breadth of industries that you just mentioned, speaks to the complexity and the need for a really thoughtful strategy as well as product focus. And to that end, I want to recognize that HPE is one of the few enterprises, or maybe the only one, at least that I've personally come across, who has committed to a significant amount to a business unit around edge specifically, and really therefore formalize your commitment to this particular technology. So could you please tell us a little bit more about HPE's edge business, as well as your portfolio of the products and solutions that you guys offer?
Sure. So really, if we got to think back about 4 years ago when we created this business unit, and I was part of the team which conceived our first generation of products. And really, the genesis of why we decided this deserved its own focused business was because we saw a few trends happening at the edge that we felt HPE was in a great position to capitalize on and deliver value for our customers who are looking to use edge and IoT. The first trend is just the vast increase in the number of sensors embedded in devices. I mean, you think about your average smartphone, it is a walking sensor host, right? You got sensors of sound, sensors of light, basically your camera, sensors of location. So we've gotten to a point where it is really, really cheap to embed sensors in all manner of devices. And the industrial and operations realm is not an exception to that rule, right? So a typical pump, for example, could have dozens of sensors embedded in it, measuring everything from vibration to flow rate to acoustic noise, in case you're trying to find things like cavitation. So those sensors are very cheap. They're embedded in a lot of these devices. These sensors are no longer simple analog signal producing devices. They're actually digitizing this data. In many cases, they're sending this data over wired or wireless networks. So you have better sensor connectivity. So really, it's this amalgamation of having lots of sensors, having sensors producing digitized data, and being able to connect this up to a higher level system that is driving a massive, massive data growth at the edge, right? So think of an easy example, right? Cameras, pretty ubiquitous, right? And today, an average full high definition, 4K camera can easily produce anywhere from 20 to 50 megabits of traffic, depending on the video quality, right? And you multiply that by dozens of cameras you'd have in a typical retail store, or the hundreds of cameras in a warehouse, we're talking hundreds of megabits to gigabits of network traffic just on raw video footage. And this is even before we have analyzed the data and extracted value from it. So really, when you look at this trend, you realize that the only way you can solve it is by rethinking the way we acquire and analyze data, and rethink the way in which we take a control action based on the insights you get from the data. And that's an area where our business unit has spent significant time and effort to both understand and deliver products and solutions to address those. So let's unpack those three areas: the acquisition, the analysis, and the control. For acquisition, I mentioned earlier, a lot of these sensors are already able to send digitized data over a network like Wi-Fi, right? And we have an Aruba portfolio, access points, software to manage those access points, secure those access points, authenticate devices that get into those access points. We already have a portfolio which has been playing in that domain. So we straight away have an inroad into the connectivity aspect of it. But when you go into the industrial realm, we start to run into protocols that most people in IT are not familiar with, right? Protocols like CAN bus, Modbus, Profinet. These are protocols which have been in use for years and years in those domains, and a lot of those legacy systems in manufacturing plant or an oil rig in a car continue to use these old protocols. So we need to bridge that gap between what IT systems speak to what OT systems speak, and that's a role that Edgeline plays really well, because we have inherent built-in capabilities to talk those protocols and have drivers and software that knows how to interact with those OT operational technology devices and get data out of them. And that acquisition, in my opinion, is the critical missing part today, is getting a conduit to that data that's siloed in those systems. And we're trying very hard to make it easy for our customers to bridge that gap. The second part is the analysis, and this is an area which is really firmly in our backyard, because we've been building enterprise class analytics platforms for our data center customers for years and years. So we know what it takes to build the best compute platform, the best storage platform, the best networking infrastructure to effectively manage and analyze and provide insights from the data. And the best part is we're doing this at the edge in an identical way to how you would do it in your core or your cloud, right? We're using the same types of accelerators, the same identical software stacks. So as a customer, you don't have to rejig the way you do things, build a junior version of your software stack just because you're at the edge. Instead, you take your existing analytics tools, you take your existing ways of processing data, and you simply relocate it physically to a system that sits close to the source of the data. And you can then choose to frictionlessly move this workload between edge, core, and cloud, depending on your business needs, not depending on whether the technology is available at the edge or not. So we're aiming to make that non-question. And then the third aspect is control. I'd postulate that if you did not have a plan to take control action based on insights, why do the insights at all, right? Because it's great knowing something went wrong, but if you're not going and correcting it, either pushing a defective part off your production line or turning off a valve to prevent a catastrophic failure of a pump, if you're not taking the control action, doing the insight produces a result which does not impact your business direction. So we want to embed the control action, the ability to directly control the entity that you're monitoring, into our Edgeline products. And that kind of is the penultimate goal of the analysis and the data acquisition. Okay, and all of these capabilities, we're really aiming to package these as turnkey solutions, because it is hard doing Edge and IoT. I mean, it is not a simple exercise to go to a manufacturing plant that might have been built 10, 20 years ago, and understanding how to interconnect all these non-IT systems, how to collect and normalize the data, and what kind of insights you can get from it. And we're aiming to make easy for our customers to do that, right? So through our PointNext services organization, we have advisory and professional services around things like condition monitoring. So we call it fast stat condition monitoring, where we can actually advise the customer on how they interconnect their devices, what type of data they can collect, how should they analyze it, how should they manage this data, how should they interlink this with their core and cloud infrastructure So they're operating all three as a spectrum and not each of those independently as silos. Same thing we're doing with intelligent workplace and facilities, right? Look, hooking into building automation systems so we know how your heating and cooling is running, how your lighting is working. We're able to trigger and act on those based on things like room occupancy rates. You know, is the room booked? Is there a person actually in the room that they are booked? And deliver better cost efficiencies to organizations that might be managing those buildings. And then finally, there's a lot of fundamental research that we do as part of HPE Labs. So we recently formed an Edge and IoT Center of Excellence. And one of the charters of that Center of Excellence is to uh, architect technologies that enable us to deliver these capabilities as a service. Because as you know, our CEO has set a goal that by 2022, we should be able to deliver all our products and solutions edge to cloud as a service. And really, we're doing some fundamental research and engineering work to help us get to that goal.
Oh, excellent. That's an amazingly cohesive packing down of what HPE does as a business unit, as well as in response to the market demands and challenges that the clients face. And that being said, you spoke to a couple of different industries, for instance, manufacturing. You also touched upon automotive as areas where use cases can live, and I'm sure you have a whole litany of examples. And I personally, and I've heard the same from others who are learning alongside with everyone else, that use cases breathe life into the challenges and benefits that organizations experience and are really helpful when discussing the adoption of this technology. Whether it's a current use case or maybe some forward-thinking prediction of how you think edge can be, because we're all thinking about the future, especially now. What are some real-life use cases or potential ones where you see this technology either thrive now and or where you see it potentially living in the hopefully the near future?
Yeah, the thing I love about the edge is there are just so many thousands of use cases that we believe our products and solutions can solve. So really the challenge is not finding things to solve the challenge is choosing what we want to do and make sure we do it in a very seamless way for our customers. So some of the key verticals where we see great opportunity for edge, not just from HPE, but also from our partners. One of them would be telco, because what we're seeing right now is there's a big capital refresh of cellular infrastructure, not just in the United States, but also in other regions, to enable 5G based communications. And the interesting thing about 5G is, unlike previous evolutions, it's not just a bandwidth upgrade. You're not just going to be able to stream your favorite sitcom in 10 seconds instead of 10 minutes. There are a whole suite of other capabilities it introduces to help improve latency of network response. For example, if you're in a semi-autonomous vehicle or an autonomous vehicle, you want to be able to make decisions of which car stops at the junction and which car proceeds. You want to make those decisions in microseconds, milliseconds, not seconds. So there's an increasing focus with 5G on improving network latency, on improving network reliability, because those kind of mission critical use cases really don't want your network to drop, and 5G is really architected to be able to do that. But what this means from an edge compute standpoint is it puts a lot of pressure on compute residing close to the subscriber. And in this case, residing in maybe the cellular tower that your phone is connecting to or your device is connecting to. And a lot of these telcos are realizing that the historical way of using an appliance to run a radio access network is not working anymore. They got to move to more higher performance industry standard servers and run those functions as software defined applications, just as they do in their core with NFV and SDN type of capabilities. So we've seen a number of telcos, including some who have already started production deployments using our platforms to support the 5G radio access network. So it's an amazing opportunity. It's really going to power the next generation of edge and IoT use cases, because ultimately you need that connectivity, because not every device out there has the compute needed to make this get those insights. And 5G is really going to help them get there. The other dimension of the telco space is the need for a lot of the carriers to move beyond just being a pipe, just being a bandwidth provider, to actually providing value-added services on top of their infrastructure. And the term commonly used is MEC or MEC or multi-access edge computing. And we recently announced a joint go-to-market with AT&T, where they're standardizing on our Edgeline platforms as the preferred infrastructure to run MEC services that AT&T will deliver to their end customers. So it's really exciting because MEC allows, almost like an edge cloud experience for these customers, and a lot of them really desired that capability because they don't really want to host infrastructure in a space-constrained retail store, for example. Another vertical where we see great opportunity is just federal and state local agencies, right? Because there's a need for compute to be deployed in the field. You think about a disaster scenario, right? Maybe you have a hurricane or something, and you have people who go out in the field from federal agencies, from state agencies, who are looking for down power lines, who are looking for flooded areas. And today, analyzing all that data, the video footage they might get from a drone, is extremely difficult because they have to archive it and take it back to somewhere where the compute exists to go and look at those hours of footage. Wouldn't it be wonderful if they could do this in the field? So just providing application hosting capabilities, providing high performance analytics using techniques like artificial intelligence at the edge delivers enormous value for these agencies. And then another domain is manufacturing, right? So we talked about the value that customers can get by instrumenting and analyzing data from their manufacturing facility. And I'm happy to say that we are drinking our own champagne. So the HPE factory in Europe that produces a vast majority of our servers shipping into that region has a vision inspection solution that was built on top of our Edgeline platform. And it is using things like AI and video analytics to look at, are components properly inserted, are labels properly applied, was the system assembled correctly? So we can detect those issues, correct those issues well before it goes to the end of the process, and then we find a problem, shipments get delayed, customers get upset, etc. So it's a great example where we're not just preaching, we're actually practicing what we preach.
Yeah, I love the how you said drinking your own champagne, which is a much more enticing version of drinking your own Kool-Aid for more reasons than one, but just specifically in this context, because it's so much more forward thinking, it's celebratory, but it also looks towards the future of what's to come, and which is so much of what you touched upon with Edge, not just being about advanced analytics and the latency, which are the foundational aspects which really drive people to adopt the Edge, but it's also about all the other ways in which it brings in other technologies, in which it's like a transformative core, or where a lot of people are going. That's how I think of it. So, with that being said, Bharath, do you have any other parting thoughts for anyone listening today, or anyone listening? The TBR updated market landscape will be published coming up this August, and will certainly feature HPE, and we invite you all and urge you all to take a look.
Yeah, I guess my parting thoughts would be, we recognize that Edge is not a data center, right? It doesn't have the cozy space, power, cooling, IP support that you would get in your data center. So really, when you're thinking about implementing Edge and IT technologies in your enterprise, the first thing I'd get very good clarity on is, what is your business goal, right? What are you trying to achieve by getting access to the data at the edge, analyzing the data, and what control action are you going to take to improve the outcome of your enterprise? Because that is going to guide what type of solution you adopt, right? Do you need AI-based technologies deployed at the edge, or would something simpler suffice? What is the role of the core and cloud for what you're trying to achieve? Do you need a very tight interoperation between those three segments to maybe give you a combination of quick insight, quick time to insight that the edge provides, with the macroscopic depth of insight that you would get out of core and cloud? So understanding that, I think, is a pivotal starting point as customers go on this journey. In addition, don't discount the pain of your IT folks in having to support infrastructure you deploy at the edge, because they might have to drive 6 hours out to a windmill in the middle of nowhere to service equipment. And so not having the ability for them to simply connect remotely and do a majority of their diagnosis and troubleshooting and go prepared on site, they're going to love you if you have that capability built in. And then finally, security. I mean, security is probably the number one question I get from my customers, because at the edge, the attack surface is so much larger than a controlled data center or a cloud, right? And if you're not thinking about security from the ground up, and in our case, from the metal upwards, and building a foundation of trust, so you can trust the system that's collecting the data, you can trust the data that's coming out of it, and you can trust that the insights you're getting from the data are accurate and relevant to your business, is super important. So put security as the number one consideration when you're thinking about what infrastructure you deploy at the edge. And the great news is we're giving you the same security we have done for years and years and years in our core and cloud customers.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much for joining me today, Bharath. I really appreciate your input, and this is some really exciting stuff that you guys are doing at HPE.
Thank you, Nikki.
Take care.